I think everyone has seen the morning footage from Kyiv, from Odesa, from other cities. Afterwards in Odesa, following the drone raid, a maternity hospital, a sports complex, administrative buildings, and the zoo were damaged. There was also a strike on the film studio. That information came out a bit later. 2 people were killed and 9 injured at the time I'm recording this video. Kyiv also endured one of the most intense attacks ever. I think you've also seen the morning footage showing Kyiv shrouded in smoke. A high-rise in Obolon, an office center, and the Saint Sophia Cathedral were damaged during the night. This was reported by the Minister of Culture. In short, the Russian version, they claim to have carried out a group strike on military targets, including missile and armored vehicle enterprises. Well, I've just listed all those missile and armored industry enterprises for you. Oh, and this time Ukraine shot down 7 missiles that were headed for the country last night. There was a huge number of Shaheds, and we're talking about 2 ballistic missiles, North Korean and 5 Iskander cruise missiles. So Iranian Shaheds and North Korean ballistic missiles, along with the millions of shells supplied by Kim Jong-un, have truly become a real lifeline for Putin. I started wondering, is it possible to pressure or clamp down on those who are supplying Putin with millions of shells, ballistic missiles, Shaheds, and so on, with complete impunity? It turns out it is possible. I'll talk about that a bit later. And now the 2 deranged psychopaths, Putin and Kim Jong-un, have decided to cooperate even more closely. In other words, Putin will now help Kim Jong-un produce Shaheds. This is a guaranteed 100% chance of war on the Korean peninsula. Well, I'll get to that a bit later, and there will be absolutely effective ways not only to determine who is to blame, but also what to do. So Zelensky demanded action from America after the strike on Kyiv. Specific actions are needed, actions that have the power to force Russia to make peace. There needs to be tough pressure for the sake of peace. By the way, what's going on with the sanctions? Just literally 2 weeks ago, and Trump said, "I've had enough, my patience has run out, Putin is crazy." 2 weeks, 1 week after that, there was a statement, "They need more time, let them fight each other a bit longer." Trump is referring to the shelling between Russia and Ukraine. That's what he calls "let them fight a bit longer." I checked to see if Trump had made any statements about this. He commented on Greta Thunberg's deportation, saying that she's angry and needs to take anger management classes. By the way, Greta, we're waiting for you here too. So if Israel be the way, Israel is deporting both Greta and the activists who were with her. Oh, by the way, you can come visit us, see it with your own eyes, maybe take a trip to the Black Sea coast. There, Putin left you a surprise in the form of fuel oil. There you go. Well, I don't think anyone will come, but that's a shame. So Russia is increasing the accuracy of North Korean KN-23 ballistic missiles and will help Kim Jong-un launch his own production of Shaheds. This was stated by the head of the main intelligence directorate, Kirill Budanov. Well, what can you say about that? In other words, Putin and Kim Jong-un are actively preparing for new wars, and they're helping each other both technologically and financially. Putin is even supplying Kim Jong-un with technology over there. In short, everything is just great, and everyone is pretending that this is how it's supposed to be. This will undoubtedly lead to, I'm telling you, Kim Jong-un is now sitting there watching, why couldn't I do this before, like Putin? Well, I can just sacrifice 1 million of my own citizens. That's just small change. Another 1 million will come along. So what? In exchange for 1 million of my citizens, under sanctions that I'm already facing anyway, I'll just gain global recognition. Everyone will start talking to me. Even Trump will start negotiating with me. Everyone will be begging me, please stop the war. Isn't that how it works? So why not start a war, Kim Jong-un? Now Putin will help him make Shaheds, and they're building huge production facilities there. And by the way, it works both ways. They'll be supplying each other. So, and this is a very important point now. If the West just turns a blind eye to the fact that they're helping each other, then that's it, get ready for a new war. And not just, by the way, on the Korean peninsula. And now let's move from the question of who is to blame to what should be done. I've always been amazed that the completely unhinged Kim Jong-un with his missile launchers is constantly scaring everyone, firing those missiles toward the Yellow Sea and elsewhere, his nuclear tests, his attempts to intimidate everyone. I wonder how he gets away with everything. Yes, he's under sanctions, but he's doing just fine. Have you seen the military parades he holds? He keeps getting more and more weapons. And just imagine for a second, if he completely loses it and starts pressing all the buttons. So what would happen then? Not only was he allowed to create nuclear well, he was actually allowed to create nuclear weapons. I mean, but everyone understands that North Korea is a closed, militarized, kind of paranoid dictatorship, but it's not invulnerable. It's absolutely vulnerable. It has critical vulnerabilities that can be exploited. So what are its vulnerabilities? Now let's move on to what should be done. Dependence on China. That is, for Kim Jong-il, 90% of foreign trade is with China. Fuel, food, machinery, chemicals. Basically, without this economic lifeline from China, he would simply collapse, well, within a year for sure. Direct pressure on China in this case, after all, it's supplying missiles. These missiles are hitting Ukraine. It's supplying shells. The shells are hitting Ukraine. If Trump is afraid to pressure China using the Russia lever, then use the North Korea lever. But no, for Trump, Kim Jong-un is a smart guy. And then there's the mechanism of these secondary sanctions. That is, everyone who uses gray schemes, and most of the supplies go through gray schemes. Since North Korea is under sanctions, transshipments in ports, barter, cooperation in border areas, all of it in the era of digital technologies and satellite imagery, everything can be seen and everyone can be brought under sanctions. Sea routes. So, for example, shells and missiles are being shipped to Russia from the port of Razhin in Primorye to the Vladivostok area. Therefore, all of this can also be tracked. Monitoring of ships under the DPRK flag, all these Russian offshore zones, North Korean, Far Eastern, Russian ports. Everyone who enters, they all get put under sanctions. Is it possible? It is easily. Introducing military control, this is something one of my acquaintances with whom I discussed this topic recommended. Or quarantine zones in the Sea of Japan, that is the so-called PCI. So is it possible? It is. Sanctions, freezing the assets of companies that handle logistics, insurance, and cargo processing for the voyages, those can also be targeted. We'll talk about the most effective method a bit later. That would be a straight 50% increase. Kim Jong-un, in fact, finance his weapons programs by 50% through crypto theft. This is really no joke. He has huge entire divisions dedicated to theft, crypto theft, and extortion. And so 50% of his weapons program is financed by Kim Jong-un through this very team. Moreover, they steal in Japan, South Korea, the USA, Vietnam. They steal all over the world. If a coordinated group were to clamp down on them more tightly, that is, blocking crypto wallets associated with these hacker groups, international investigations, charges of financing terrorism, sanctions against countries and crypto platforms that turn a blind eye to where Kim Jong-un's money is being laundered, all of this is possible. You see? Well, plus, of course, there's also this forced labor, the export of workers. That is, they send workers abroad and 90% of their salaries are sent back to the country. This provides foreign currency to the elite, the regime, and so on. Here, I think a public investigation is needed. And who should conduct such a public investigation? The Organization of Concerned Nations? Well, maybe the IMF and the International Labour Organization. But even there, everyone tends to just look the other way. In general, when my colleagues and I discussed this, we went through all these points and issues. If it were all addressed comprehensively, it would be just wow. Secondary sanctions from the US, EU, the G7, International Maritime Control, Japan, Korea, South Korea, the US. The seizure of cryptocurrency assets, that's the US and the crypto exchanges. In short, they could have hit Kim Jong-un so hard that he would have forgotten forever what McDonald's burgers are and what it means to transfer weapons somewhere. But now that's it. That is, North Korea is just a country surviving in the shadows thanks to China, a kind of spiteful little miser that is convenient to keep in this state. The question is something else. How does China view this rapprochement between Russia and North Korea? Although, on the other hand, China is the donor supporting the economies of both the Russian Federation and North Korea, so it maintains control through this support. Well, Ukraine can, in principle, make a fairly direct statement that China's silence regarding those very ballistic missiles amounts to silent complicity. In other words, this needs to be turned into a public diplomatic blow. In fact, China ends up being an accomplice to the shelling of Ukraine. And if we turn a blind eye to this now, believe me, Kim Jong-un, who has already set up huge weapons manufacturing plants, will soon have new customers. Who could they be? Iran, private military companies in Africa, dictatorial regimes. You'll end up with those kinds of problems. Well, that means everyone is fine with it. Meanwhile, the armed forces of Ukraine are not just holding the line, but are also successfully hitting the Russians. And let me remind you, we have a major fundraiser going on for our old friends at the Global Drone Academy, which trains and graduates top-class UAV operators. They've already trained more than 6,500 people. Right now, there's just a line to get in. Everyone needs them. We've realized that this is essentially a drone war. So friends, let's show our support. A lot of consumables are needed to train large groups, and such groups are currently in training. And you are doing an amazing job. I always tell you how much I appreciate this support. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video and in the comments to this video. And there's also a PayPal option there for those who want to help from abroad. We see everyone. A huge thank you to all of you. If you're not watching on my channel, here's a QR code. It leads straight to the Academy's bank. And here is further proof of closer cooperation. From that same interview with Budanov, one can conclude that Russia may start bringing in North Koreans as labor migrants who will later be recruited into the Russian army. Receive and sign. Overall, I think these are two colossal problems if they are not addressed right now. Apparently, with Putin, at least some people just want all of this to end as soon as possible, just so they can get back to trading. And recently, we've come to the most effective way to hit Putin's supporters and seriously complicate his arms supply logistics. Recently, Western media published a piece suggesting that Ukraine could attack the Pacific Fleet of the Russian Federation, or even, can you imagine, North Korean ships that are supplying weapons to Russia. So I started to wonder, from a technical and more importantly a political standpoint, how realistic is this actually? Let's put it this way, so that some unknown groups completely unconnected to Ukraine would attack ships carrying weapons. Technically, this is entirely possible, but it requires the highest level of political and diplomatic preparation because it could set a precedent if it is properly organized and executed. So, I think the technical side is clear. Unknown groups could acquire unmanned boats. They have a confirmed range of 800 to 1,000 kilometers. And their warheads range from 150 to 300 kilograms, or maybe even more. So that's enough for what's the issue here? Destruction. We're talking about striking, apparently, civilian vessels that are carrying, transporting, or delivering weapons for the Russian Federation. In general, it's technically quite possible. Now, let's talk about the legal and political aspects. Officially, North Korea is not at war with Ukraine, and its ships are still considered civilian, even if they're carrying military cargo. So, first of all, North Korea, how can this be justified legally? North Korea is violating the UN Security Council's ban on arms exports. Violates. There are several confirmed investigations showing that ammunition is being delivered from North Korea to the Russian Federation. So a statement from Ukraine about its right to self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter is entirely possible. Israel acts this way. Israel has carried out dozens of attacks on ships carrying weapons in the Red Sea, the Mediterranean, and off the coast of Syria. The US, for example, has seized North Korean ships that were delivering weapons. Moreover, this ship was confiscated and sold. So, in general, there are precedents. Where and how to attack there are options. At the anchorage of Rajin port, really, what difference does it make where and how? It's not us, we're not there. Some unmarked unmanned boats or drones, aerial UAVs showed up, and there you go. The shipping route there goes through the Sea of Japan toward Vladivostok. Well, basically, right in that section. And if it's in neutral waters, then neither Russia nor North Korea can claim it was an attack on their territory. And everything is in place, all the evidence is there. The effect, believe me, will be absolutely tremendous. Risks. Yes, there are risks. North Korea might accuse us of aggression. Oh my, look how scary that is. But Kim Jong-un has no military leverage against Ukraine. Well, maybe he could send his soldiers to the Russian Federation. Well, theoretically, yes. Russia might call it a provocation. Oh, how frightening, how terrible, right? And some allies might, say, look how aggressive Ukraine is now, even somewhere far away. They'll cough, pretend that it's better not to do that, and so on. Yes, so attacking is risky. Could unknown pirates attack? They could. Privateers. But strategically, it would be justified. And this, I think, would be the best possible sanction against Kim Jong-un. Of course, China will be outraged. Are you serious? How could that be? That's not, well, what can you do? And let me remind you, I've specially put together a selection where Israel attacks in the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, and the Arabian Sea. Sudanese coast, Port Sudan was aviation there, destroyed warehouses and convoys carrying weapons. In general, most of the operations carried out by Israel took place in neutral or territorial waters of third countries. But Israel, as I mentioned, refers to the right of self-defense. So everything is just fine. And as for the confirmed deliveries, I've already talked about that. That is, there are also satellite images from the port of Machar, and even statements from, can you imagine, the White House itself in 2023, John Kirby made this statement about how Russia is receiving containers with military equipment. There's also an independent investigation by the British Royal Institute from 2023 regarding flights to Primoyev from North Korea. All of this exists. And there's also a joint investigation by the BBC and Reuters that was already in January 2024. They even managed to obtain crew lists and expenses for servicing ships involved in the export detention of timber and coal. But these coincided in timing with the routes used for delivering ammunition. See how it happens? And naturally, there's the issue of false declared cargo. In other words, they claim to be transporting coal, but in reality, it's ammunition. All of this is documented. And by the way, I think that Ukraine's asymmetric actions, Operation Web, really scared some people. Oh dear. And do you know why? Because it's getting out of control. That is, if you keep Ukraine on a short leash, so to speak, you can drag out the war for a long time, gradually wearing down Russia's military potential. And in that case, it'll take even longer for Putin to reach Europe. You can act that way, or you can just eliminate Russia's military potential here and now. Putin himself doesn't stand on ceremony at all, does he? That's why they say Ukraine wants to drag the whole world into World War III. We've heard this from Trump's team. But it's not that Ukraine wants to drag anyone in World War III is bound to happen anyway. The only question is how many dictators and their regimes will be on the other side? And how strong will they be against the civilized world? And how well armed will they be? Ukraine is actually doing everything possible to make sure there are fewer dictators in that club and that their military potential is reduced. So should we just prepare over there now, stockpile warehouses, fill them with weapons and sit around waiting for Putin to come? Well, he's not going to come on full strike from above, and then who knows what will hit. Maybe most of it will explode in his own silos, of course, but some of it will get through. That's why, of course, the whole world needs to help Ukraine, and then this scum will quickly be forced to sit down at the negotiating table. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, and if you're already subscribed, make sure to hit the bell icon. Now, let's take a look at another one of Putin's accomplices. With Kim, everything is clear. He's completely unhinged. He jumps around and rejoices when missiles pass by on platforms. Parades are his favorite pastime, just like Putin's. But Putin also has allies right in the middle inside the European Union, and no one can do anything about them either. As it turns out, and as I've said many times before, if you want to know when Russia is changing its information tactics, just watch Orbán's statements. Here we call him the pterodactyl of peace. Orbán is he's even, like a weather vane that turns just before the wind does. That's why some people were surprised when Orbán called Russia weak and said that Russia can't even win against Ukraine. In reality, he very precisely echoed the new Russian narratives that have been prepared for Western countries. Only now, for European speakers, they look a bit different. In other words, it's quite a cunning tactic. Just appreciate the elegance of this game. Orbán makes an unexpected statement about Russia. Viktor Orbán believes that the war in Ukraine will not escalate, turn into a global conflict because Russia is too weak. And everyone's like, wow, how can that be? How could Orbán say something like that? Here's the quote. The Russians are too weak for that. They can't even defeat Ukraine, so they won't be able to truly attack NATO. At the same time, Orbán believes that there should first be a ceasefire in Ukraine and only then a peace agreement. But attention, not between Ukraine and Russia, but between the US and Russia. And Orbán also admitted that Europe needs to be strong because the Russians only understand the language of force. And everyone's like, what's going on here? What happened? I don't know. Did they stop paying his salary or something? And of course, Orbán wrapped it up. Now I'll explain why he said that, and I'll keep it very brief. Naturally, he stated he wrapped up by saying that Ukraine is not suitable for joining NATO and the EU because neither the Hungarians nor the EU are interested in a direct conflict with Russia. See what he's doing. Now, let's look at what this sly cockroach really meant. Russia is too weak to defeat Ukraine or attack NATO. This is a pure rhetorical trap. In other words, it's falling right into the Kremlin's narrative. So Orbán is saying that the Russians are weak, they can't defeat Ukraine, and they won't attack NATO. And the Kremlin's narrative is, we don't want a war with NATO. You're demonizing us for nothing. We are only fighting with Ukraine, And even then, we're not fighting, we're defending ourselves. So Orbán is reassuring Western society that Russia isn't dangerous, so there's nothing to be afraid of. And there's no need to get involved either. Russia is not a threat to you. Well, what then? It can't even handle Ukraine over there. It really creates the illusion that Russia is not a threat, but rather some kind of local player, which actually contradicts the Kremlin's real hybrid and nuclear expansion. So we understand that pretending to be weak, saying, yes, we're weak here, we're just dealing with Ukraine ourselves, there's no need to interfere, no need to supply weapons. Let's do that. That's what Orban sometimes comes to. The thesis that Russia is weak is perfect for lulling the West into complacency. And by the way, many would be happy to be lulled. Just give them such a thesis. Well, first a ceasefire, then an agreement between the US and Russia. So this is actually a perfect hit on one of the main Russian narratives. Orban says that the peace agreement should not be between Ukraine and Russia, but between Russia and the US. And the Kremlin has always said the following: Ukraine is a puppet of the West. All decisions are made in Washington, so we only negotiate with the US. So it's a complete repetition. Ukraine as a subject is simply crossed out, reduced to the status of some kind of proxy. And Russia puts itself on an equal footing, on the same level as the United States. Naturally, the goal is very simple: to undermine Ukraine's legitimacy. By the way, Russians, I don't know why half of the Russian bots can't pronounce the word legitimacy. They write anything, legitimity, and whatever else you can imagine. There are a few problematic words, even for TV hosts. Back when I used to go on TV, when Azerbaijan was in the news, that was a real challenge for some reason for many hosts. Well, in general, bots aren't always taught to write correctly. Although it seems to me that in reality, the fact that they express themselves in Russian worse than most Ukrainians is done on purpose for them. And naturally, the goal of this remark by Orbán is to erase Ukraine as a subject. We're bringing geopolitics back in the format of Yalta II. Let the big players decide the fate of the small ones. And Ukraine isn't suitable for joining the EU or NATO. This is Orbán's own special little trademark. Russia has always said that admitting Ukraine into NATO is a path to escalation, that it is unacceptable. And naturally, Orbán says Ukraine isn't suitable, only he acts more cunningly. He held a referendum in his country and said, it's not me, it's the Hungarians who say that Ukraine shouldn't be in NATO, or rather shouldn't be in the European Union. NATO goes without saying, in their opinion. So Orbán is certainly a sly character. And his arguments are often not legal, but purely technical. Like, let's not provoke Russia. Why shouldn't Ukraine be in NATO? Because it provokes Russia. So all of this is blackmail, in the spirit of classic Moscow-style blackmail. And now he's also substituting the results there. Like, I have nothing to do with it. Now he also has Fico on his side. Well, in general, by the way, it's still not entirely clear with Poland how they and Orban will interact, the newly elected president. I mean, how he will interact with Orban. Well, we'll find out soon enough. But Putin is actively betting on gaining more and more mandates in the European Union. I mean, new politicians. He almost succeeded in Moldova, almost in Romania. In general, this continues 7, though Russia is the aggressor. If these were peaceful times, if Putin hadn't attacked, he would have quietly placed his people there long ago, and we would have far more problems now. And by the way, notice how he is placing or trying to place governments loyal to the Kremlin around Ukraine. For what purpose? I think so that later he can turn them all into a big Soviet Union too. Well, he does have that desire, although I think he'll die long before that happens. Basically, Orban is an internal mouthpiece for the Kremlin within the European Union. He does everything, unfortunately, as I've said 100 times already. Our enemies are much more active than our allies. If only we had a dozen people as active as Orban on our side, I think Ukraine would already have whatever weapons it wanted. But Ukraine does have friends and allies. I always say a huge thank you to those who help Ukraine. So let's do everything possible to make sure Ukraine can give a worthy response to Putin and the Kremlin. And still, as they say, enough with sitting on the sidelines. Later it might be too late. And right now, they can definitely help us force that bold scum to the negotiating table, at the very least. At the very least,